Don't leave me. That's what a 5-year-old boy said, gripping the hand of a man 300 people were too terrified to even look at directly. 20 minutes earlier, that same hand had been resting on the handle of a gun holstered under a $2,000 coat. Nobody in that train station knew the boy's name yet. Nobody knew the man's real one either, only the name whispered in back rooms across the city, the one that made grown men cancel meetings and cross streets. What they were about to find out is that the boy wasn't lost by accident. And the man wasn't the first stranger to notice him standing alone on that platform. He was just the only one who stayed. This story starts 9 minutes before that, on a Thursday evening, in the coldest week Chicago had seen in 6 years. Dmitry Volkov is 44 years old, and he has built his entire life around one unbroken rule: nobody touches him. Not a handshake held a second too long, not a hand on his shoulder from an old friend, not even his own tailor measuring his sleeve without asking first. Bodyguards learned within their first week that they walk beside him, never behind, and never close enough for their arm to brush his. It isn't vanity. Anyone in his organization who's been around long enough knows better than to think that. It's something buried so far back that even the men who've worked for him for 15 years have stopped trying to guess at it. They just know the rule, and they respect it the way you respect a loaded gun left on a table, carefully, and without questions. Tonight, Dmitry sits alone in the back of a black Mercedes idling outside Chicago Union Station, waiting on a call that's 11 minutes late. His driver, Yusuf, knows better than to ask why they're parked outside a train station instead of the restaurant 3 blocks over where the actual meeting was supposed to happen. Plans change. Dmitry doesn't explain himself, not to Yusuf, not to anyone below him, and rarely to anyone above him either, though tonight, technically, there is no one above him. That's the whole problem the meeting was supposed to solve. 2 hours ago, his second-in-command, a man named Anatoly who'd been with him since before the organization even had a name, was found in his own kitchen with his throat opened ear to ear. No note. No message. Just silence, which in this business is its own kind of message, and Dmitry knows exactly what it means. Someone is making a move on him, and they wanted him to know it before he could brace for it. He should be at the restaurant right now, meeting the only 2 men in the city he still half-trusts to tell him who did it. Instead, his phone rings, and it isn't either of them. It's a blocked number, and when he answers, there's nothing but breathing on the other end for 4 full seconds before it disconnects. That's when Dmitry tells Yusuf to pull over here, at the station, because something in his gut, the same gut that's kept him alive through 2 attempts already, tells him the restaurant is a trap and this stop is buying him time to think. He steps out into the cold, alone, because that's another rule: when he needs to think clearly, no one walks with him. Yusuf stays with the car. Dmitry walks the platform edge with his coat collar up and his hand resting, out of habit more than intent, near his hip. That's when he sees the boy. Small, maybe 5 years old, standing perfectly still beside a metal bench with a backpack shaped like a dinosaur strapped to his shoulders, both straps pulled tight the way a mother ties them when she expects a long day. He isn't crying. That's the first thing Dmitry notices, and it's what makes him actually stop walking instead of doing what every instinct built over 20 years tells him to do, which is keep moving, notice nothing, get involved in nothing. Lost children cry. This one is just standing there, scanning every face that passes like he's memorizing them, like he's already given up on any of them being the right one and is now just cataloging strangers out of habit. Dmitry has seen that particular stillness before. He saw it in the mirror when he was 7 years old, standing in a train station very much like this one, 4,000 miles away, in a country that doesn't exist by that name anymore. He doesn't like remembering that. He built 37 years of his life specifically so he'd never have to remember that, and yet here it is, standing in a dinosaur backpack, looking directly at him now with an expression that isn't fear and isn't hope either, it's just waiting, the particular exhausted patience of a child who has learned that adults eventually notice you if you stand still long enough. He should walk past. Every rule he's built his survival on says walk past. A man in his position, on the worst night of his professional life, with an unknown enemy possibly watching him right now from somewhere in this crowd, cannot afford to be photographed crouching beside a strange child in a public train station. It's exactly the kind of soft, human moment that gets used against men like him, turned into leverage, turned into a headline, turned into the one crack an enemy needs to find the man underneath the name. He knows all of this with total clarity. And he walks toward the boy anyway. "Where's your mom?" Dmitry asks, crouching down to a distance he judges careful, close enough to be heard over the station announcements, far enough that his coat doesn't brush the boy's shoulder. Old rules don't disappear just because tonight is strange. The boy studies him for a long moment, the way children do when they're deciding whether an adult is one of the safe ones or not, an instinct most people lose by the time they're old enough to need it most. She said stay by the blue bench, the boy says. His voice is small but steady. She said she'd be right back. That was a long time ago. How long? The boy shrugs, the universal gesture of a child who hasn't learned to measure time in anything except how hungry he's gotten since the last thing happened. Dmitri glances at the station clock. It's 7:52. He has no way of knowing how long is a long time to a 5-year-old, but something about the flat exhaustion in the boy's voice tells him it's been longer than any mother intends to leave a child standing at a bench alone. What's your name? Dmitri asks. Teddy, the boy says. Then, after a pause, like he's deciding whether this stranger has earned it, Theodore Ashford Miller. That's my whole name. Mom says I have to say the whole thing if a policeman asks. I'm not a policeman, Dmitri says. I know, Teddy says, matter of fact, the way children deliver observations that would take an adult 3 sentences to work up the nerve to say. You have a gun on your belt. Policeman where there's different. Dmitri goes very still. Not from fear, very little in his adult life has managed to make him afraid, but from the particular disorientation of being seen so plainly and so accurately by someone who should, by every measure of size and age and standing, have no power to see him at all. 20 years of men twice this boy's size failing to notice the exact same detail, and a 5-year-old clocked it in under a minute. That's very observant, Dmitri says carefully. My dad had one too, Teddy says, and something shifts fast across his small face, there and gone, the kind of shadow that tells an experienced listener there's a whole story behind those 4 words that this child is not old enough to tell properly yet, and maybe not old enough to fully understand himself. Dmitri doesn't push. Pushing a frightened child rarely gets the truth faster, it just teaches them to stop talking to you. Well, Theodore Ashford Miller, Dmitri says, standing back up to his full height but keeping his voice low, the tone he uses on skittish new recruits who need steadying without being spoken down to. Let's find your mom before the trains stop running tonight. It's meant to be a 5-minute detour. Walk the boy to station security, hand him off, get back to the car, get back to the very serious, very dangerous problem of who just killed his second-in-command and why. That's the plan. Dmitri has run 100 plans more complicated than this one and executed every single one exactly as designed. This is not one of those times. Because when he turns to lead the boy toward the security office, Teddy's small hand slides into his, not asking permission, not hesitating, just reaching up and taking it the unthinking way children take the hand of whichever adult happens to be closest when they're scared, the way they've done since long before either of them can remember, an instinct older than language. And the moment those small fingers close around his, Dmitri Volkov, a man who has not allowed a single unplanned touch in 11 years, who once broke a business associate's wrist for gripping his shoulder a beat too long during a photograph, does not pull away. He doesn't understand why, not in that first second. He just stands there on a train platform in the cold with his second-in-command's blood not even dry yet somewhere across the city, an unknown enemy possibly closing in on him at this very moment, and a stranger's son's hand wrapped around 3 of his fingers, and something in his chest that has been locked so tightly for so long that he stopped noticing the lock years ago gives the smallest, quietest crack. Okay, he says, and his voice comes out rougher than he intends. Let's go. They don't make it 15 feet before a man in a gray hoodie peels off from a support column near the ticket kiosks and starts walking, too fast, too direct, in a line that has nothing to do with catching a train and everything to do with reaching them before they reach security. Dmitri clocks it instantly, the stiffness in the man's right arm, the way his eyes are fixed not on Teddy but on Dmitri himself, the earpiece barely visible under the hood. This isn't a father looking for a lost son. This is someone who has been watching Dmitri Volkov's every move tonight, and the boy has just become the fastest way to reach him. Teddy's grip tightens around his fingers. That's not my dad, Teddy whispers, small and certain, the same flat instinct that clocked the gun on Dmitri's belt now flaring wide-eyed toward the approaching man. I don't know him. Dmitri's other hand moves, slow and deliberate, to rest just inside his coat. Whatever plan he had for tonight, the restaurant, the meeting, the quiet, careful hunt for whoever murdered Anatoly, has just collapsed into something much simpler and much more dangerous. Somebody used a lost child as bait to find him in a crowd where he'd let his guard down. And now that same child is holding his hand like he has no intention of letting go, at the exact moment Dmitry Volkov needs both hands free more than he's needed them in years. The man in the gray hoodie is 8 feet away now, closing the distance with the unhurried confidence of someone who has done this before, someone who knows a crowded train station is the safest place in the world to make a move because witnesses make people careless, and carelessness gets exploited by people who know exactly what they're doing. Dmitry has been on both sides of that equation more times than he can count. Tonight, for the first time in longer than he can remember, he is not thinking 2 moves ahead the way he always does. He is thinking about a small hand wrapped around 3 of his fingers and how badly he does not want to let go of it. "Teddy," he says, low and even, crouching just slightly so his voice reaches only the boy. "I need you to stand exactly behind my leg. Can you do that for me?" Teddy doesn't ask why. He just nods, the quick, serious nod of a child who has learned somewhere, from someone, that when an adult's voice goes flat and careful like that, you listen without arguing. He presses himself against the back of Dmitry's coat, one small fist still curled into the fabric near his knee, and Dmitry feels that grip more than he'd like to admit. The man in the hoodie stops 6 feet out. Close enough to see his face now, younger than Dmitry expected, maybe 26, 27, with the particular jumpy stillness of someone who's been given an order he doesn't fully understand and is executing it anyway because the money was good enough not to ask questions. That's useful information. Men who believe in what they're doing hold themselves differently than men who are just doing a job. "You're a hard man to get alone, Mr. Volkov," the man says, and his voice cracks very slightly on the last word, which tells Dmitry something else. This isn't a professional. Professionals don't get nervous saying a name. Boss wants a word. Nothing has to happen to the kid. "Who's boss?" Dmitry says. Not a question. A demand, delivered so quietly that a woman walking past with a rolling suitcase doesn't even glance over, doesn't register that anything happening 6 feet away from her could possibly be dangerous. That's another skill Dmitry has spent 2 decades perfecting, the ability to make violence look, from 3 feet outside it, like nothing at all. The man's eyes flick sideways, toward the escalators, and Dmitry follows the glance without turning his head, cataloging what he sees in half a second, a second man near the coffee kiosk, pretending to read a departures board he's already checked twice. A third figure by the far exit whose coat is too heavy for the weather, the telltale bulk of something worn underneath it. 3 men. Amateur spacing, too clustered, too obvious once you know to look. Whoever sent them cared more about getting it done fast than getting it done clean, which tells Dmitry something important: they're not planning to negotiate. They're planning to make sure this ends tonight, one way, in the station, in front of witnesses who won't even understand what they watched happen until they see it on the news tomorrow. "You killed Anatoly," Dmitry says. It isn't a guess by the time it leaves his mouth. It's a certainty settling into place, the way certainty always does for him, quiet, cold, and about 4 seconds too late to have changed anything. The young man's jaw tightens, and that's confirmation enough. He should have stayed home tonight, the man says, and something ugly and satisfied moves behind his eyes, the particular cruelty of someone who has decided, somewhere between accepting this job and standing here now, that killing an old man in his own kitchen was a good story to have told about himself. "You should have come to that restaurant, Mr. Volkov. Would have been faster. Cleaner. Instead you're standing here holding some stranger's kid like it's gonna matter." Behind him, Teddy's fist tightens in Dmitry's coat. Dmitry feels the small tremor running through the boy's whole body, the particular fear of a 5-year-old who doesn't understand the specifics of what's happening but understands completely that it's bad, that the calm has gone out of the air around him the way it does right before adults start yelling, or worse. Something happens in Dmitry's chest in that moment that he doesn't have a name for yet. He has stood in rooms far more dangerous than this one, has had guns pointed at him by men far more competent than the 3 currently converging on this platform, and felt nothing but the familiar cold clarity that lets him do what needs doing without his hands shaking. He has never, not once in 20 years, felt what he feels right now, the specific, unbearable awareness that whatever happens in the next 90 seconds, there is a child's hand fisted in his coat who did not choose to be standing here, who has nothing to do with any of it, and who is about to watch something no 5-year-old should ever have to watch. He's not part of this, Dmitry says, and for the first time tonight, there's something in his voice that isn't calculation. It's close enough to a plea that he almost doesn't recognize it in his own throat. "Wasn't part of it till you picked him up," the man says with a shrug that's meant to look careless and doesn't quite land. "That's on you, not us." Dmitri makes a decision in the space of a single breath, the same kind of decision he's made 100 times before in rooms just like this one, except every previous time, the only thing at stake was his own life, and that math had always been simple. Tonight the math is different, and he doesn't have time to sit with how strange that feels. "Teddy," he says quietly, not looking down, keeping his eyes locked on the men in the hoodie. "When I say run, you run straight to the woman by the ticket window in the red coat and you tell her you need station security. Can you remember that?" "I don't want to let go," Teddy whispers, and his voice cracks on the last word in a way that undoes something in Dmitri he didn't know was still capable of being undone. "I know," Dmitri says. "I'll find you after. I promise." It is, he will realize much later, the first unplanned promise he has made to another human being in over a decade. What happens next happens fast, the way real violence always does, nothing like the slow-motion drama of movies, just a blur of motion and noise compressed into maybe 4 seconds total. The man in the hoodie reaches toward his waistband, and Dmitri is already moving before the motion finishes, closing the distance instead of retreating, because retreating puts Teddy directly between him and the threat, and every instinct in his body has already decided that cannot happen. He grabs the man's wrist with a grip built from 20 years of exactly this kind of moment, twists hard enough to hear something give in the joint, and the gun the man never fully drew clatters onto the platform tile and skids under the bench. Screaming starts somewhere behind them, a woman, then several voices at once, the particular chaos of a public space realizing altogether that something is wrong. Dmitri doesn't have time to register any of it because the second man is already moving from the coffee kiosk, and the third is closing from the exit, and for one suspended half-second Dmitri Volkov, a man who has never in his adult life needed help from anyone, understands with total clarity that he cannot fight 3 men and protect a 5-year-old at the same time, not both, not tonight. Then a train announcement booms overhead, the 8:04 to Naperville, arriving track 6, and the crowd that had been frozen in shock breaks into motion, people surging away from the noise, and in the chaos of bodies Dmitri does the only thing he can think to do. He scoops Teddy up in one arm, feels the boy's small arms clamp around his neck with a desperate strength that surprises him, and runs. He doesn't run toward the exit. He runs toward the crowd, into it, using the very thing his enemies were counting on as a hiding place instead of a hunting ground, weaving between commuters with a 5-year-old pressed against his chest and his coat flapping open enough that anyone looking closely would see the holster and understand exactly who was passing them. Nobody looks closely. That's the whole trick of a crowd, everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. Behind him, he hears shouting, hears the distinct sound of the second man shoving through commuters too aggressively, drawing exactly the kind of attention his colleague was smart enough to avoid. Dmitri cuts left down a service corridor he knows exists because he has made it his business for 15 years to know every layout of every building he might one day need to disappear from, and within 20 seconds the shouting behind him fades into the general roar of the station. He stops in a stairwell landing, chest heaving, Teddy still clamped around his neck, and for the first time since he crouched down beside a dinosaur backpack 15 minutes ago, Dmitri Volkov allows himself 4 full seconds to simply stand still and breathe. "You okay?" he asks, and his voice comes out hoarse. Teddy nods against his shoulder, not lifting his head, small fingers still knotted into the collar of Dmitri's coat like letting go might make all of this real in a way it isn't yet. "You didn't leave," Teddy says, muffled, into the fabric. Dmitri closes his eyes. "No," he says. "I didn't." He doesn't know yet that the woman who left this boy at a blue bench 40 minutes ago did not walk away by accident. He doesn't know that Teddy's father, the one with a gun on his belt, worn different than a policeman's, is a name that, in about 6 minutes, is going to collide with Dmitri's world in a way neither of them could have predicted. All he knows right now, standing in a stairwell with a stranger's child breathing hard against his neck, is that something in him has shifted permanently, and there is no version of the rest of tonight where he sets this boy down and walks away clean. The stairwell smells like cold concrete and train exhaust, and for almost a full minute neither of them moves. Dmitri stands with Teddy's weight settled against his hip, the boy's breathing slowing from ragged gasps into something closer to normal, and he uses those 60 seconds the way he's trained himself to use every quiet moment in a crisis, not to rest, but to think. 3 things are true, and he lines them up in his mind the way he'd line up facts in any negotiation. 1. Whoever sent those men knew he would be at that station, which means someone inside his own circle told them, because he decided to stop there himself, on impulse, less than 15 minutes before he arrived. 2. They used a lost child as the reason he'd let his guard down, which means either the boy being there was a coincidence they got lucky with, or it wasn't a coincidence at all. 3. He has just made a promise to a 5-year-old that he has no idea how he's going to keep, and some quiet, stubborn part of him has already decided he's keeping it anyway. Teddy, he says gently, setting the boy down on the stairwell landing but keeping one hand resting light on his shoulder, I need you to tell me about your mom. Everything you remember. Even the small stuff. Teddy sniffles, wipes his nose on his sleeve, and seems to consider this seriously, the way children do when an adult finally asks them a question like their answer actually matters. Her name is Claire, he says. She has yellow hair, but not really yellow, more like, he searches for the word, honey. She smells like the lotion in the blue bottle. She picked me up from school today and she was crying in the car, but she said it was allergies. Was she crying before or after you got to the station? Before, Teddy says. The whole way there. She kept looking behind us. Like this. He twists around dramatically, checking over both shoulders, an unconsciously accurate imitation of someone checking for a tail. Dimitri's stomach tightens. And your dad, Dimitri says carefully. You said he had a gun like mine. Something closes in Teddy's face, quick, the same shadow from before. He's not here anymore, Teddy says, in the flat, rehearsed cadence of a child repeating a sentence adults have told him many times, one he's learned to say without asking what it actually means. Mom says he had to go away for work. A long time. Longer than regular work. Dimitri has been in this business long enough to translate that sentence instantly and correctly. Prison. Not dead. Dead gets explained differently to 5-year-olds, usually with softer words, heaven, or stars or sleeping. Away for work, longer than regular work is what you tell a child whose father is doing time, when you're not ready yet to explain what that means or you're hoping, however unrealistically, that it won't be forever. What's your last name again? Dimitri asks, already suspecting the answer will matter more than the boy could possibly know. Miller, Teddy says. But Mom said my dad's real last name is different. She said someday when I'm older she'll tell me the real one. Dimitri goes very still, and this time it has nothing to do with training. A memory surfaces, unwelcome and immediate, 18 months ago, a federal case that gutted a rival organization from the inside out, testimony from a mid-level lieutenant that put away 4 men who'd spent a decade making Dimitri's life difficult from a rival crew across the city. The lieutenant's name, in every file Dimitri had ever seen, was Miller. Except that wasn't his real name either. Everyone in that world knew he'd testified under a different name than the one he ran under, because his real name would have gotten his family killed the second the transcript went public. If this boy is that lieutenant's son, then the woman crying in a car 40 minutes ago, checking behind her the whole drive, wasn't running from a random threat. She was running because someone finally figured out who Teddy's father really was, and where his family had been hiding, and she made the split-second, gutting decision that the safest place to lose her own son on purpose was in a crowded train station full of witnesses, rather than have him with her when whoever was following them finally caught up. She didn't abandon him. She was trying to save him the only way she had time left to try. Dimitri crouches back down to Teddy's height, and for once the careful measured distance he keeps from everyone doesn't feel like a rule he's following, it feels like something he wants to break entirely, wants to pull this boy in and promise him things he has no business promising a stranger's child on the worst night of his own life. Teddy, I think I might know some people who can help find your mom, he says. But I need you to trust me a little longer, okay? Can you do that? Teddy studies him with the same unsettling clarity from the platform, the look of a child who has already learned, far too young, to read adults for the truth underneath their words. You're one of the bad guys, he says. Not scared. Just stating it, the way he'd state a fact about the weather. The men at the station were scared of you. Grown-ups are only that scared of bad guys. Dimitri doesn't flinch, doesn't reach for a softer version of the truth the way most adults would with a child this young. Something about the boy's directness demands the same in return. Some people would say that, he says. I've done things I'm not proud of. I won't pretend otherwise to you. He pauses, choosing the next words with more care than he's chosen words in a business deal worth millions. But I've never hurt anyone who didn't come looking for it first. And I am not going to let anything happen to you tonight. That part isn't negotiable, no matter what else is true about me. Teddy considers this with the gravity of a much older person weighing a contract. Then, slowly, he reaches up and takes Dimitri's hand again. Okay, he says. But you have to actually find my mom. Not just say it. I will, Dmitri says, and means it with a conviction that startles him. His phone buzzes in his pocket, not the burner he uses for business, the personal one, the number only 4 people alive have. He checks it, expecting Yusuf, wondering if his driver has noticed he's been gone 20 minutes longer than any errand should take. Instead it's a text from a blocked number, the same one that called and breathed at him earlier tonight before disconnecting. You have something that belongs to us. Bring the boy to the Fulton Street warehouse by 9:30, and we'll discuss Anatoly's replacement. Bring anyone else, and neither of you walks out. Dmitri reads it twice. The message isn't asking him to hand Teddy over as leverage against the boy's mother, it's asking him to hand Teddy over as leverage against Dmitri himself, which means whoever's behind tonight already knows the boy is with him, which means they've been watching this whole encounter far more closely than 3 amateur gunmen in a train station should have been capable of. Someone senior is running this. Someone patient enough to have Anatoly killed as an opening move, patient enough to use a 5-year-old as bait, patient enough now to threaten that same child to bring Dmitri exactly where they want him. He thinks about Fulton Street. He knows that warehouse, it belonged, until 8 months ago, to a supplier he cut ties with over a disagreement about product quality that Dmitri suspects, now, wasn't really about product at all. It's owned on paper by a shell company he's seen before, buried 3 layers deep in filings his own accountant flagged and he dismissed as irrelevant at the time, because at the time he had no reason to think anyone was building toward tonight. Someone has been planning this for months. Anatoly's murder wasn't the opening move. It was just the first move Dmitri was allowed to see. Who's texting? Teddy asks, small and curious, peering up at the phone with the unself-conscious nosiness of a child who hasn't yet learned that some things aren't his to look at. Someone who thinks I'm going to do exactly what they want, Dmitri says, and something cold and clear settles over him, the particular calm that has kept him alive through 2 decades in a business that kills most men who try it. They're wrong. He pockets the phone and looks down at Teddy, still holding his hand, still trusting him with a completeness that Dmitri has done nothing in his adult life to deserve and everything in the last 20 minutes to earn anyway. Change of plans, Dmitri says. We're not going to Fulton Street. But I know someone who might know where your mom is right now, and it isn't safe for either of us to stay in this station much longer. Can you run? Just a little bit further. Teddy nods, jaw set with a determination that looks, for just a flicker of a second, exactly like the expression Dmitri wears into rooms he's not sure he'll walk out of. I'm fast, Teddy says. Good, Dmitri says, and for the first time all night, something that might almost be the ghost of a smile moves across his face. So am I. They come out of the stairwell into the lower concourse just as, on the upper level behind them, the man with the ruined wrist is shouting into a phone of his own, telling whoever's on the other end that Volkov has the kid, that Volkov ran, that they need more men at every exit before both of them disappear into a city with 11 million places to hide and only one of them, right now, actually holding the other's hand. They emerge from the lower concourse into a side street where the cold hits like a wall, and Dmitri pulls Teddy's dinosaur backpack straps tighter without thinking, an unconscious parental gesture that would have struck him as absurd 2 hours ago and now feels like the only sensible thing he's done all night. Yusuf is exactly where he left him, engine running, and the look on his driver's face when he sees Dmitri come around the corner carrying a strange child tells Dmitri everything he needs to know about how badly this must look from the outside. Boss, Yusuf starts. Drive, Dmitri says, already opening the back door, settling Teddy onto the seat and buckling him in with hands that are steadier than they have any right to be. Not the restaurant. Priya's place. And call ahead, tell her it's urgent and it's not business. Yusuf's eyebrows lift a fraction, the closest thing to open surprise Dmitri has ever seen cross his driver's face in 9 years of employment, because in 9 years Dmitri Volkov has never once used the word urgent about anything that wasn't business, and has certainly never asked to see the one person in his organization whose relationship to him has nothing to do with the organization at all. Priya Kapoor is 61 years old, runs a small legal aid clinic on the near west side, and has known Dmitri since he was 19 years old and she was a young public defender who spent 4 months arguing, unsuccessfully, to keep a scared immigrant teenager out of a system that would have chewed him up and spit him back out twice as hard as the streets already had. She lost that case. She never stopped checking on him anyway, for 25 years, through everything he became, refusing every time he tried to pay her back with money because, as she's told him more than once, some debts aren't meant to be settled that way. She is the only person left alive who remembers him before any of this, and the only person he trusts completely with something he cannot yet explain even to himself. She opens her door in a robe, hair loose, expression shifting from sleepy confusion to sharp alertness the instant she sees the boy standing beside Dmitri, small hands still locked in his. "Whose child is this?" she says. Not a greeting. A demand, the same tone she probably used cross-examining witnesses for 30 years. "I don't fully know yet," Dmitri says. "But I think his father is Raphael Ostrowski." Priya's face goes carefully blank in the specific way of someone who recognizes a name that means trouble and is deciding, in real time, how much of that recognition to let show in front of a child. She steps back and waves them inside without another word, and it's only once Teddy is settled at her kitchen table with hot chocolate and a coloring book pulled from some drawer that seems suspiciously well stocked for a woman with no grandchildren, that she pulls Dmitri into the hallway and drops her voice to something low and urgent. "Raphael Ostrowski testified against the Kowalczyk organization 18 months ago," she says. "Under federal protection. I know because I helped negotiate part of the deal, pro bono, off the books, a favor for a colleague. His wife and son went into a relocation program under the surname Miller. If that boy in my kitchen is really his son, Dmitri, and someone found them, this isn't your problem. This is federal witness protection getting blown, and that means whoever's hunting them has resources that go a lot higher than street muscle." Dmitri absorbs this in silence, running it against everything he already knows, and a picture starts assembling itself that he doesn't like at all. The Kowalczyk organization was gutted by that testimony, 4 convictions, for men who'd spent a decade being a genuine problem for Dmitri's operation, gone in one trial. At the time, it looked like pure luck, a rival crew imploding from the inside while Dmitri's own operation expanded quietly into the territory they left behind. He remembers thinking, at the time, that it was the best year his organization had had in a decade. He never once considered that someone might believe he'd orchestrated it. "They think I turned Ostrowski," Dmitri says slowly, the pieces locking into place with the sick clarity of a plan finally becoming visible after being built in shadow for months. "Someone in the Kowalczyk remnant thinks I fed a federal witness against them, and they've spent 18 months planning to take it out of my hide. Anatoly. The men at the station. The warehouse they wanted me to walk into. It was never about a territory dispute. It's revenge for a testimony I had nothing to do with." "Did you have nothing to do with it?" Priya asks, and it's not an accusation, just the plain question of someone who's known him long enough to ask it directly. "No," Dmitri says. "I didn't even know Ostrowski's real name until 40 minutes ago, from his 5-year-old son." Priya studies him for a long moment, the same look she gave him 25 years ago across a cracked courtroom table, trying to decide how much of what he's telling her to believe. Whatever she sees settles something in her face. "Then someone built an entire war on a wrong assumption," she says quietly. "And that little boy in there is standing right in the middle of it because his mother made a split-second choice to leave him somewhere she thought was safer than staying with her." They both look toward the kitchen, where Teddy is coloring with fierce concentration, tongue between his teeth, hot chocolate mustache still on his upper lip, entirely unaware that he is currently the single most important variable in a war between 2 criminal organizations that neither of them started and neither of them can fully control anymore. "I need to find Claire Miller," Dmitri says. "Before whoever's hunting Ostrowski's family finds her first. And I need to figure out who inside my own operation has been feeding information to the Kowalczyk remnant, because someone told them exactly where I'd be tonight, and that means someone close to me has already chosen a side that isn't mine. That's 2 very large problems for one very short night," Priya says. "I know," Dmitri says. "I'm aware." His phone buzzes again, not the blocked number this time, but Yusuf, standing guard by the door, who's just gotten a call of his own from one of the 2 men Dmitri actually trusts inside his organization, a woman named Rosa who runs his logistics and has never once given him reason to doubt her. Dmitri takes the call in the hallway, and Rosa's voice comes through low and fast, the tone of someone reporting bad news as efficiently as possible because efficiency is the only kindness available in the moment. "Boss, I pulled the security footage from Anatoly's building like you asked before all this happened. Whoever did it had a key. No forced entry. And I cross-checked the warehouse deed on Fulton Street like you flagged last month." The shell company routes back through a law firm that also represents Marcus Cole. Dmitri's jaw tightens. Marcus Cole runs the largest surviving piece of what used to be the Kowalczyk organization, inherited the throne after the convictions gutted the old leadership, and has spent the last 18 months rebuilding just enough strength to make exactly the kind of move that's happening tonight. "And the key to Anatoly's building," Dmitri says. "Who else has one?" There's a pause on the line just half a second too long. 3 people, boss, Rosa says. You. Me. And Victor. Victor. Dimitri's driver before Yusuf, promoted 18 months ago to run security for the Eastern District, a man who has sat in rooms with Dimitri for over a decade, who Dimitri would have said, this morning, he trusted with his life without a second thought. The timing lands on him like a physical weight, 18 months, almost exactly matching the length of time since the Kowalczyk convictions, since Ostrowski's family disappeared into protection, since someone patient and thorough enough to spend a year and a half planning revenge started laying groundwork that Dimitri never saw because he had no reason to look for it inside his own house. Don't approach him, Dimitri says. Don't let him know we're onto anything. I need him to think tonight is still going according to plan. Boss, if he's the one who told Cole's people where you'd be, then he's also the only lead we have to Claire Miller, Dimitri says. If Cole's people already grabbed her, or if they're closing in on her right now, Victor might be the only person who knows where. I need him talking, not running. He ends the call and stands in Priya's narrow hallway for a moment, the weight of the last hour settling into his shoulders in a way that has nothing to do with the immediate danger and everything to do with the slower, colder realization underneath it, that a man he trusted, a man who has sat across from him at 100 dinners, has spent a year and a half quietly building the machinery that got his oldest friend killed tonight. From the kitchen, Teddy's voice calls out, small and unbothered by any of it. Mr. Dimitri, I made you a picture. Dimitri walks back into the kitchen, and the boy holds up a crayon drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small, standing in front of a train, with a lopsided yellow sun overhead. Underneath, in careful, uneven 5-year-old handwriting that Teddy must have asked Priya to help him spell, it says, my friend. Dimitri looks at it for a long moment, and something in his chest, the same something that cracked on the platform when a small hand first closed around his fingers, gives way a little further. That's very good, Teddy, he says, and his voice isn't quite steady. Can we find my mom now? Teddy asks. Yes, Dimitri says, crouching down to meet his eyes, making a second promise on a night when he's already broken every rule that used to define him. We're going to find her. And then I'm going to find the people who did this, and I'm going to make sure they never get to do it to anyone else's family again. Outside, the cold Chicago night presses against Priya's windows, and somewhere across the city, Marcus Cole is receiving a phone call from a man named Victor, informing him that Dmitry Volkov has gone dark, that the boy is still with him, and that whatever happens next is going to happen faster than anyone originally planned. 40 minutes before Dmitry Volkov crouched beside a dinosaur backpack at Union Station, Claire Miller sat frozen at a red light 3 blocks from the platform, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone white, watching the black sedan that had been behind her for the last 6 miles hang back exactly 2 car lengths, exactly the distance a professional keeps when they don't want to spook their target but don't want to lose them either. She'd known something was wrong since 4 p.m., when the caseworker who checked in on their family every quarter, a kind, tired woman named Denise who'd handled their file since the relocation, called her cell from a number that wasn't Denise's, and asked 3 questions no real caseworker would ever ask over the phone. Claire had hung up without answering the 3rd one, hands already shaking, and called the real Denise's office line, only to be told that Denise had left work early that afternoon and hadn't been seen since. That was when Claire understood, with the specific cold certainty of someone who has spent 18 months rehearsing exactly this nightmare, that whoever had found them wasn't guessing. Someone inside the system that was supposed to protect her family had been compromised, and the only question left was how much time she had before they arrived at her door instead of finding her on the road. She'd packed a bag in 4 minutes. Pulled Teddy out of school with a story about a dentist appointment that the front office didn't question because she'd made herself into precisely the kind of unremarkable, forgettable mother who never gives anyone reason to look twice. She'd driven with no destination in mind beyond a way, checking her mirrors every few seconds, and somewhere around the 3rd mile she'd spotted the sedan and known, the way you know a sound in your own house doesn't belong, that this was it. This was the night Raphael had warned her about in his last letter from prison, the one line he'd written and then crossed out so hard the pen tore the paper before writing it again anyway, if it ever comes, don't wait for me. Get him somewhere crowded and get yourself somewhere else. They won't want 2 targets when one gets away clean. She hadn't understood it then. She understood it with horrible clarity now, staring at a red light with her 5-year-old asleep/pretending to be asleep in the back seat, his dinosaur backpack already on because she'd told him it was a game, a fun surprise trip, and he believed her the way 5-year-olds believe everything their mothers tell them. The plan that formed in the space of 4 blocks was not a good plan. It was the only plan. Union Station, at rush hour, would be full of cameras, full of transit police, full of exactly the kind of witnesses that make men like the ones in that sedan hesitate to act openly. She would leave Teddy somewhere visible, somewhere safe-looking, somewhere she could watch from a distance long enough to be sure security or a kind stranger picked him up, and then she would drive away fast and loud and obvious, giving the sedan every reason to follow the moving target instead of the stationary one. It was, she would think later, the single hardest thing she had ever done, harder than testifying alongside Raphael's deposition, harder than 4 months of a relocation program that stripped away every name and photograph and piece of home she'd ever known. Walking away from her own son at a blue bench, telling him to wait, telling him she'd be right back, knowing there was a real chance that sentence was a lie. She'd watched from the parking structure across the street for 6 minutes, phone pressed to her ear on a call to nobody, just watching, waiting for someone, anyone, safe-looking to notice him. She'd seen the 4 men in the crowd she didn't recognize, moving with too much purpose, and her stomach had dropped through the floor. And then she'd seen a tall man in an expensive coat crouch down in front of her son, and every maternal instinct in her body had screamed at her to run back across the street, except the sedan had pulled into the structure behind her at that exact moment, and 2 men had gotten out, and Claire Miller had made the second impossible choice of her night. She'd gotten back in her car and driven, fast, away from her son, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in any more that the stranger crouching beside Teddy was one of the good ones. She has been driving for 31 minutes now, cutting through side streets, doubling back twice, losing the sedan somewhere around the interstate on-ramp through a maneuver she half remembers from a movie and never expected to actually need. Her phone has 14% battery left and no calls from any number she recognizes, which is either very good news or very bad news, and she has no way of telling which. She pulls into a gas station on the edge of Pilsen, hands shaking too hard to properly grip the pump, and that's when her phone rings, a number she doesn't recognize, Chicago area code. She almost doesn't answer. She answers. Mrs. Miller. A man's voice, calm, faintly accented, careful in a way that makes her chest seize before he even finishes the sentence. My name is Dmitry Volkov. Your son is safe. He's with me. Claire's knees nearly give out against the car door. Where is he? Where is my son? If you've heard him. He's eating dinner in a friend's kitchen right now, drawing pictures, and asking me every few minutes if I've found you yet, Dmitry says, and something in the plainness of it, the specificity, cuts through Claire's panic just enough for her to keep listening. I know who your husband is. I know what he testified to, and I know that the people who want your family are the same people who murdered someone very close to me tonight. I'm not going to pretend that makes me a safe person, Mrs. Miller. I've done things in my life I'm not proud of. But I give you my word, the same word I gave your son an hour ago, that nothing happens to him while he's with me. How do I know this isn't exactly what they'd say, Claire says, voice cracking, if they already had him? There's a pause on the line, and when Dmitry speaks again his voice has shifted, gone lower, more deliberate. Because if I wanted to use your son against you, Mrs. Miller, I wouldn't be calling to ask where it's safe to bring him. I'd already know, because you'd already be standing in front of me. I'm calling because he asked me to find you, and I intend to keep that promise regardless of what either of us decides to do next. You can hang up right now and keep running. I won't stop you, and I won't tell anyone where you are. But I don't think you have anywhere left to run that's actually safer than sitting still with people willing to fight for him. Claire closes her eyes, gas pump still frozen in her hand, cold Chicago wind cutting through her coat, and makes the third impossible decision of the night. Tell me where, she says. 20 minutes later, in a modest brick house on the near west side that looks nothing like anywhere a man in Dmitry Volkov's position should logically be spending the worst night of his professional life, Priya answers a knock at the door to find a pale, exhausted woman with honey-colored hair standing on the step, and behind her, at the curb, an unfamiliar car pulling away fast. A neighbor who'd given her a ride the last 4 blocks after she ditched her own vehicle 2 streets over, just in case. Claire doesn't wait for introductions. She walks straight past Priya into the kitchen, and the sound Teddy makes when he sees her, a single, cracked, wordless cry, half sob half laugh, crayons scattering as he launches himself out of the chair, is the sound that finally breaks something loose in Dmitry's chest that he suspects has been locked shut since he was younger than Teddy is now. He watches Claire drop to her knees and gather her son up with both arms, watches her bury her face in his hair and shake, watches Teddy's small hands fist into her coat the exact same way they'd fisted into Dimitri's an hour before, and understands, watching it, that he has just witnessed something he has spent 20 years of careful, deliberate distance making sure he would never have to want for himself. Claire looks up at him over her son's shoulder, mascara tracked down both cheeks, eyes red and fierce. "Thank you," she says. I don't know what to." "You don't owe me anything," Dimitri says, and means it. "But we're not finished yet, Mrs. Miller. The people who forced you into that car tonight aren't going to stop because your son got away from them. And I have my own reasons now to make sure they don't get another chance." Claire's face hardens, grief giving way to something colder and more focused. "What do you need from me?" "Everything you know," Dimitri says. "Every name, every detail your husband ever told you, no matter how small it seemed at the time. Because somewhere across this city right now, a man I trusted for 11 years is on the phone with the person who ordered tonight, and I intend to be standing in front of both of them before the sun comes up." His phone buzzes, Rosa again, voice tight and fast the second he answers. "Boss, Victor just left his apartment. He's heading toward the old Fulton Street warehouse. And boss, he's not alone. He's got Marcus Cole's number pulled up on a call that's been connected for 6 minutes straight." Dimitri looks across the kitchen at Claire, still holding her son, at Priya standing guard by the window, at the crayon drawing still lying on the table, 2 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun, the words "my friend" in uneven 5-year-old letters, and feels the last of his hesitation burn away into something clean and certain. "Tell Yusuf to bring the car around," he says. "It's time I had a conversation with Victor. And with the men who thought murdering my oldest friend was a safe way to start a war." The Fulton Street warehouse sits at the dead end of a street the city stopped maintaining years ago, its windows boarded, its loading dock rusted shut except for the one bay door someone has clearly been using regularly, judging by the fresh tire tracks in the frost. Dimitri has Yusuf parked 2 blocks out and approaches the rest of the way on foot, alone, the same way he's walked into every dangerous room of his adult life, except tonight, for the first time, that decision costs him something to make. An hour ago there was a small hand in his that made walking toward danger feel different than it used to, and even though that hand is safely 30 minutes away in Priya's kitchen, some part of it is still with him, steadying him in a way he doesn't fully understand and doesn't have time to examine. He hears voices before he reaches the bay door, Victor's voice, unmistakable after 11 years, low and urgent, and another voice Dimitri has only ever heard on wiretap transcripts Rosa pulled months ago and he dismissed at the time as background noise. "Marcus Cole. He should have walked into this 2 hours ago," Cole is saying, pacing near a folding table under a single hanging work light, the rest of the warehouse swallowed in shadow. "Instead he's got the kid, he's got Ostrowski's wife probably by now, and you're telling me he hasn't moved." "He's not stupid," Victor says, and there's something in his voice that Dimitri hasn't heard from him before, not the flat confidence of the men he's known for a decade, but something closer to strain, closer to a man arguing himself into a decision he isn't fully at peace with. "He's careful. He'll come when he's ready, not when we push him." "We don't have time for him to be ready," Cole snaps. "Every hour he's loose with that kid is an hour he's got to figure out it was you who let us know where he'd be tonight. And when he figures that out, Victor, no amount of 11 years is going to matter to him." Dimitri steps into the light. The reaction is immediate and total. Cole's hand goes for his jacket, 2 men Dimitri hadn't clocked in the shadows step forward with weapons already raised, and Victor, standing closest to the work light, simply goes very still, the particular stillness of a man watching the exact conversation he'd hoped never to have arrive several hours earlier than he'd planned for. "Nobody move," Dimitri says, and his voice carries the flat, absolute authority of a man who has commanded rooms far more dangerous than this one for 20 years. He doesn't reach for his own weapon. That, more than anything, is what makes Cole's men hesitate. A man walking alone into a room with 3 armed opponents, hands visibly empty, is either a fool or someone who knows something they don't. "I'm not here to shoot anyone, Cole. I'm here because you murdered a man who was closer to me than my own blood, and I want you to say out loud, to my face, why you thought that was owed to you." Cole's jaw works. "You know exactly why." "I know what you think you know," Dimitri says. "You think I orchestrated Ostrowski's testimony to get your organization from the inside so I could pick over the pieces. That's what you built this entire night around. And you're wrong, Marcus. I didn't know Raphael Ostrowski's name until 3 hours ago, from his 5-year-old son, in a train station, where your men tried to use that same child as bait to walk me into an ambush. Convenient story, Cole says, but something flickers behind his eyes, the first real crack of doubt Dmitri has seen since he walked in. It's not a story. It's the truth, and I don't need you to believe it, Dmitri says. I need you to understand what happens next regardless of whether you believe it. He turns his head, slow and deliberate, to look directly at Victor for the first time since entering. 11 years, Victor. I trusted you with things I never told another living soul. And you gave a man information that got Anatoly killed in his own kitchen. Victor's composure finally breaks, just slightly, the mask of 11 years of careful loyalty slipping to reveal something underneath that looks almost like relief at finally being caught. I didn't know they'd kill him, he says, voice tight. Cole told me it was pressure, leverage, a message, not a body. I made a mistake trusting his word over yours, and I have spent every hour since regretting it, but I didn't sign up for murder, Dmitri. I swear that to you. Regret doesn't put Anatoly back at his kitchen table, Dmitri says quietly, and the quiet is worse than shouting would have been. But I believe you didn't order it. And that matters, tonight, more than it probably should. He lets the silence hang a beat, calculating the way he calculates everything, weighing the room, the exits, the two armed men still flanking Cole, the particular exhausted desperation in Cole's face that tells Dmitri this entire 18-month campaign has been running on borrowed confidence for longer than anyone realized. Here's what happens now, Dmitri says. You're going to call off whoever else you have watching Claire Miller and her son tonight, because that family owes neither of us anything, and I will not have a 5-year-old spend one more night of his life as a bargaining chip in a war that was built on a lie. You're going to do that because the alternative is that I make certain every remaining piece of your organization learns, by morning, that you spent 18 months and a dozen lives chasing a grudge based on nothing, while the real reason Ostrowski's testimony worked was that your own people were too disorganized to protect their own witness insulation. That story spreads faster than any bullet, Marcus. It'll finish what tonight started, one way or another. Cole's hand, still hovering near his jacket, doesn't move for a long moment. Behind him, one of his men shifts his weight, uncertain, waiting for an order that isn't coming with any confidence. And if I don't call it off, Cole says, but the fight has already gone out of the sentence before he finishes it. Then we find out tonight whether your two men are worth dying for a mistake that was never really about me at all, Dmitri says. I'd think carefully before answering that. The standoff holds for 4 full seconds, long enough for Dmitri to hear his own pulse, long enough to think, unbidden and entirely unwelcome in a moment like this, of a crayon drawing on Priya's kitchen table, 2 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun, and then Cole's shoulders drop, just slightly, the posture of a man doing the math and finding it doesn't favor him anymore. Stand down, Cole says to his men, not looking at them, eyes still locked on Dmitri. He pulls out his phone with visibly unsteady hands and makes the call, voice flat, ordering whoever's been watching Claire Miller's last known location to pull out immediately, no further contact, no further surveillance. When he lowers the phone, something in his face has gone hollow, the specific look of a man who built a year and a half of purpose around a story that just collapsed underneath him in under 2 minutes. This isn't over, Cole says, but it comes out sounding like something he needs to say rather than something he believes. No, Dmitri agrees. But it's over for the boy and his mother. That's the only part of tonight I actually came here to finish. He doesn't wait to watch Cole and his men leave. He walks back out into the cold with Victor falling into step half a pace behind him, neither speaking until they reach the car, where Victor stops at the edge of the streetlight, understanding without being told that he isn't getting in. I know what this means, Victor says quietly. For me. In the organization. You'll be gone by morning, Dmitri says. Not the way Anatoly's gone. But gone. I owe you that much for 11 years of real loyalty before you broke it, a clean exit instead of what most men in your position would get. Don't make me reconsider the generosity. Victor nods once, doesn't argue, doesn't ask for more than he's been given, and turns and walks off into the dark without looking back, and Dmitri understands, watching him go, that some doors close permanently the moment they're first opened, no matter how many years came before. It's past 11 when Dmitri walks back into Priya's kitchen. Teddy is asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that's clearly Priya's own, one small fist still curled loosely even in sleep, as though some part of him is still holding onto something. Claire sits beside him, watching her son breathe with the particular exhausted vigilance of a mother who doesn't yet trust the danger to have actually passed. It's handled, Dmitri says quietly, so as not to wake the boy. No one's watching you anymore. I have people confirming it through the night, but I don't believe Cole has the stomach left to try again. Claire studies him for a long moment, the same searching look her son gave him on the platform hours earlier. Why did you actually do all this, she asks. You didn't know us 3 hours ago. You had a war of your own to deal with tonight. Dmitri looks at Teddy, small and finally still, finally safe, and takes a long moment before answering, because the honest answer is one he's still working out himself. When I was 7 years old, he says slowly, I stood in a station very much like the one your son was standing in tonight, waiting for someone who never came back for me. I built the rest of my life so carefully around never needing anyone again that I forgot, somewhere along the way, what it felt like to be needed by someone who had no reason to trust me and chose to anyway. He glances down at the crayon drawing still on the table, 2 stick figures under a lopsided sun. Your son reminded me tonight. I don't know how to explain it better than that. Claire's eyes fill, and she doesn't try to hide it. He's not going to forget you, she says. You know that. I don't intend to give him the chance to, Dmitri says, and surprises himself again with how easily the words come, how little they cost him to say out loud. 6 weeks later, in a quiet townhouse 2 states away, under a new set of names that a federal relocation coordinator swears is more secure than the last, Claire Miller, soon to be something else again, a name she and Teddy will choose together, sits at a kitchen table opening mail that includes, tucked among bills and school forms, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside is a single photograph, a small dinosaur figurine, the twin of the one that used to hang from Teddy's old backpack, alongside a handwritten note in careful, deliberate handwriting that has clearly practiced restraint. For when he's older and asks who helped bring his mother home. No return contact necessary. Just know that if either of you ever need anything, the offer never expires. No signature. None needed. Teddy, 4 inches taller and missing a front tooth, finds his mother crying over a photograph at the kitchen table and climbs into her lap without asking why, the way children do when they sense a feeling is bigger than an explanation. Is that Mr. Dmitri? He asks, catching sight of the tiny dinosaur in the photo. Yes, baby, Claire says. Will we see him again? Claire looks at the note, at the promise folded quietly inside it, patient and unhurried the way real promises are, not the loud kind that need saying twice to be believed. I think, she says, when you're ready, he'll be exactly where you left him. This story reminds us that the people who scare the world the most are sometimes only scared of one thing themselves, being needed, and disappointing the person who needed them. It's easy to believe the loudest, hardest people in our lives have nothing soft left underneath. Most of the time, they've just buried it somewhere they thought was safe from ever being asked for again. Maybe it's the coworker who never talks about their family and flinches at small talk about weekends. Maybe it's the relative everyone's a little afraid of, who shows up anyway, every single time, without being asked twice. If someone hard and unreadable came to mind while you watched this, consider that the distance might not be coldness. It might be a door nobody's tried opening gently in a long time. And if you're the one who's built walls like Dimitri's, hard, careful, untouchable, know that letting one small hand in doesn't undo the armor. It just proves there was always something worth protecting underneath it. If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments, who's the Dmitri in your life, the one everyone's a little afraid of, who might just be waiting for someone small enough, honest enough, to hold their hand and say don't leave me.